I came from the country which went through a very long way from being a failed state, at least as it was called by Russian disinformation, to a country which is allegedly meddling at US elections and trying to install a president over there. Of course, it's a fake. The name of the country is Ukraine, and the name of the project I represent here is called StopFake. So let's go back to 2014. That was a year when Revolution of Dignity happened in Ukraine, and of course it was immediately coined by disinformation as a coup d'etat, where the new government is installed by US government, European Union, and Soros all together. But after that, we had Russian annexation of Crimea, and war in Donbass started. And as a result of all that, 7% of the territory of Ukraine was occupied by Russia. But kinetic warfare and the land grab was not that much important as information warfare, which started against Ukraine. So my colleague and I started a project called StopFake, which is using debunking and verification of information to stop the spread of disinformation, because disinformation was literally killing thousands of Ukrainians. 13,000 of Ukrainians were killed as a result of this war, and 1.5 million of Ukrainians became internally displaced people. So we started to do three main things. The first thing was monitoring, because if you are not engaged in reading all media and watching all TV channels, you might not see the scale of operation of information warfare. The second thing is archiving, because disinformation can disappear because someone just don't want you to see all those traces of disinformation being kept over internet for ages. And the third and the most important thing is debunking. So the main idea was you should not leave any disinformation unchecked and undebunked, because then people would have the impression that this is the only true thing over there. And also when people would start searching anything later on Google, they would also see what RT and Sputnik want you to see. So debunking became the main activity, and so far we have more than 3,000 stories debunked, just to give you the idea of the volume of Russian disinformation. Later, we added three other activities to what we are doing. One is a research of the narratives, because the separate fakes are not that much important, because they can come and they can go. But narratives, or meta-narratives as we call them, they stick to the public minds, and they basically form the impression of the people of what is going on the long-term perspective. Another important thing that we are doing, based on our cases we already collected, is trainings in fact-checking and verification for different organizations, with one very simple objective: to raise awareness about disinformation and its impact on the people. And education is very important, because when we debunk disinformation, we're already dealing with consequences of disinformation. But when we do education, we explain people why disinformation matters, what the impact is, and how it influences decision-making process in Ukraine or in any other country, that's create a long-term perspective to tackle disinformation. And also consulting governments and international organizations on the danger of disinformation, again, to raise awareness and make governments also participating in tackling this problem. So we started with a very basic product, which was a website in English, but subsequently we added many other European languages. For the reason, because we wanted people to read information in their own language and to help them to domesticate the problem and see not only from Ukrainian perspective, but also from perspective of Germany, France, Spain, Italy, and many other countries. Also, we went to social media, because that was a place where we can tackle disinformation much more easier and very, very quickly. As soon as Russia was using television as a main source to disseminate disinformation. And by the way, back in 2014, we had 82 Russian TV channels fully available in Ukraine. 82. And you can imagine if you have a war and the aggressor country has 82 TV channels available for your population, how they would be used for information warfare. So we also started to create TV shows in Russian, in Ukrainian, and in English to talk about this problem and to make people engaged in fact-checking. So the idea was that it's not only a small group of journalists and educators can do fact-checking, but any of you can become fact-checker and do the same job. And it was very, very important element to introduce the whole culture of fact-checking. Also, we started a radio show for people who are living in occupied Donbass and Crimea. And as I said, it's 7% of the territory of Ukraine. And those people do not have any access otherwise to media from Ukraine or anywhere else. And the last but not least was a small newspaper, actually printed newspaper, which was distributed across the contact line, people who are living on the front line and who do not have access to online news. So that were the main products we are doing, and each of them is targeting different audience. Suddenly, 2 weeks ago, President Putin said that Russian TV channels are too harsh on Ukraine, and that they are bashing Ukraine, and that they should stop doing that. And obviously, it should not be misleading us. It's not the change of a policy. It's a use of this argument of stopping information warfare for Ukraine, making concessions in a kind of peace-building efforts with Russia. On the other hand, Russian journalists immediately said, no, we don't have any disinformation campaign against Ukraine. It was not orchestrated. It was not conducted by the government. It was not well-financed, well-organized. And even President Putin himself, 2 years ago, also speaking in Valdai Club, said, yeah, unfortunately, we wish to have this information system, but we don't have CNN, we don't have BBC, and we are lacking resources for that. But that's not true, again, because our project was archiving all those pieces of disinformation on a daily basis. And we've been dealing with all types of fakes. Mostly we are dealing with the textual fakes, because they are the most complicated, and they have the biggest impact on audiences. But also we've been dealing with photo fakes, video fakes, forged documents of Ukrainian government, US government, EU, and even with forged books. So basically the idea is that these days you can do fake anything. Just some of the examples. So here you see the APC in China, in Beijing, on Tiananmen Square in 1989. But it was used to portray war in Donbass long before it actually started, to make sure that Ukrainians become demobilized and would believe that the war is already raving over. This is another example. This is a video fake which was produced just before referendum in the Netherlands, when Dutch people were voting for Ukraine-EU association agreement. And here we see allegedly some volunteers from Ukrainian volunteer battalion who are saying that, listen, people in the Netherlands, if you would not support this association agreement, we are going to commit terrorist attacks in your country. And this was an example of a fake which definitely would have immediate impact and immediate implication for how people would be voting on that referendum. Another example of forged books. So on the right, you see the picture of Donetsk before the war, and then the photo was photoshopped and used for Russian government so-called Y book on Ukrainian crimes in Donbass. So you can, again, manipulate basically anything. So just to give you the impression of the volume, as I said, 3,000 fakes were debunked. They're available on our website in any language. According to our colleagues from other projects who are monitoring specifically Russian mainstream television in Russian language, 1/3 of all primetime TV in Russian is devoted to Ukraine this day. 1/3. and 90% of materials on Ukraine, of course, are negative. What was the objective of our project? To build resilience, to make sure that people know what disinformation is, then can differentiate journalism and disinformation, and our efforts were quite successful. So if you would look here, 2 years ago, after 3 years of our project, we did this survey around Ukraine, and what we saw, 58% of people already recognize the danger of Russian disinformation. It's 58% more than it used to be at the beginning of the war. So for us, it means we did a good job. Also, the number of people who are still consuming Russian media in Ukraine dropped to 7%. Before that, it was 100%. And even those who are still consuming do not trust it, because they are mainly looking for entertainment programming over there. Anything which now is associated with Russia, Russian government, and Russian media is usually associated in Ukraine with disinformation. What else is important? So first of all, it's important to engage governments, because as I said, as academia, we can only do research of the problem, we can collect data, and we are happy to share it, but then that data, that research should be translated into the policy making, and government should recognize this as a problem, and then respectively talk to Russian government to stop disinformation. And we had some successful examples when Russian government was confronted with fake news, and they stopped doing that in different countries. Also important is what I called here, using the military term, anti-access area denial. So basically Ukraine switched off Russian TV channels, all those 82 I mentioned, and also sanctioned Russian social media companies, which were another place for disinformation, and Russian so-called news websites, because they were not about news. Again, they were about disinformation. So now it opened a lot of opportunities for Ukrainian media to develop, and also decreased the physical presence of Russian disinformation. Another important moment is the horizontal networking of different organizations. In Ukraine, you would now find a number of organizations which are doing work connected to fighting disinformation, but also you can find those organizations in basically any European country, in United States, Canada, and in many other places. If you would look how much research was done on this topic, it's a huge amount. Only on StopFake, I've seen 45 peer-reviewed articles in peer-reviewed journals. So that means that the interest is still over there, and only when we unite our efforts, we can have kind of the holistic perspective of looking at this problem. And last but not least, in which we are engaged more and more these days, is the introduction of media literacy. As I said, because it would have a long-lasting effect on the people. And we started to work with the school children, with 8th and 9th graders, and we explained those things to them. Why? Because they are the most energetic consumers of media this day, and that's why they might be the biggest victims of this process. So that's why we talk to them, we use cases from our project, but also from other projects. We heavily use examples from media literacy syllabus and other things from other countries as well, to make sure that we explain to the younger generation how disinformation can be harmful. Thank you so much, and I really do hope that you would join our project on social media, and we would keep you informed about what's going on over there. Thank you so much.